anyone here. I thought what we would try and do is something a little bit different. It's nice to change things. We'll try it out, see how it goes. Really, to try and focus on understanding the Rishonim, the key meforshim on the parsha, and one very good way to do that is to sort of go with them on a journey. In other words, you take it through a number of parshas. So I thought we'd start with the Ramban. Maybe we can go through the Ramban on Bereishis, Sefer Bereishis, see how it goes. Each parsha taking a selection from the Ramban, and hopefully that will allow us both to understand the Ramban's approach, and also, of course, through that, as always, to develop and deliver Divrei Torah, which hopefully people can share over Shabbos. It's possible we might go, as they say, mi'inyan le'inyan, from one, from another. But the idea is really to try and focus on the Ramban. And as we said, everything we do and learn should be a schus for the Yoshvei Eretz Yisrael, for our Chayolim, should be Kodesh Baruch Hu should protect them. So the Ramban has an introduction to the Torah, and the Ramban says that in his introduction. Let me just find it. If following any, as I say, it's useful but not essential to have a Mikros Gedolos or a Ramban, because it just allows you to see it inside. The Ramban is let me just see. So after the introduction, yeah. So I'm not going to go through obviously the whole introduction. He talks about a number of different ideas. The Ramban, it's important to understand. There are sections of the Ramban that are very much pshat, that explain the pshat and the psukim, and then there's also sections that are very much Sisrei Torah, secrets of the Torah. He often says al derech ha'emes, and in the introduction that's reflected as well, because he goes into Kabbalah ideas. We're going to stick to those parts that we understand. Myself, rather than the deeper one, those deeper ideas in that sense. But towards the end of the introduction, there's this one paragraph I think is worth looking at. It's the third paragraph from the end. He talks about, again, as an esoteric and Kabbalistic idea, and how the Torah was written in the Gemara. The Torah was written on Eish Shechor, on top of Eish Levana, black fire and white fire, and how that and part of the introduction actually is explaining how he explains how it works, in the sense that practically, when did Moshe Rabbeinu write down the beginning parts of the Torah and why it's expressed in a certain way. But he says, third paragraph in the end, you should know and see what I will respond to those who ask me questions in writing, and the idea and essence of writing a pirush on the Torah. He says that my approach is like the minhag of the Rishonim, in other words, those who preceded him, to provide almost like a refuge, a peace of mind, the tranquility of the spirit to those who learn Torah, who are weary of the trials and tribulations of the Golus. And I think that it's an amazing line. He says, who learn and read from the Torah on Shabbosos and Yomim Tovim. What is the Ramban trying to tell us? He's saying that a key aim, is to try and provide a pathway and to help those who toil in understanding the Torah, and referring to them as those who are long suffering of the Golus that we're in. Ramban is, after the Rambam, 13th, 14th century, and the idea of the Ramban's Pirush is, he's saying, to try and give direction, to draw their hearts through explanations, and with a few nice and with pleasant ideas, for those who listen and those who understand and want to achieve knowledge. And he says, so this is the idea. This is what the Ramban says he wants to achieve, to try and provide a pathway through understanding the Torah. Now, we also know, and we're going to see that right at the beginning, the Ramban is very focused on Pirush Rashi. He wants to understand Pirush Rashi, often debates Rashi, and maybe gives a different approach, right, from Rashi. But he quotes Rashi extensively. And a good example of that is right at the beginning. So if you turn to the very first Ramban, Bereishis Bar Elokim, he brings firstly Rashi. Rashi quotes Rabbi Yitzchak, which we're all familiar with. The Torah did not need to begin from HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem, which is the mitzvah Rishona Shemitzvah Yisrael. Sorry, it should only have begun from that mitzvah of HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem. That's the first mitzvah. Why does the Torah begin with Bereishis? I'm not going to go through the whole Rashi inside, simply so we don't, because of time. But just to explain and say it's all quoted at that beginning paragraph of the Ramban, because if the nations of the world come in and say you're Ganovim, you steal, you took it away, the land of Eretz Yisrael, nothing has changed. They say, they say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Torah says, you should know, Kol ha'aretz shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, everything belongs to Hashem. Everything belongs to Hashem. When he gives it to whoever pleases in his eyes, whoever he wishes to give it to. He gave it to them, and he takes it and he gives it to us. So the Ramban has a very basic question. Second paragraph, right? You got it? He says, I've got a question. There's a great necessity to begin with Bereishis. It's a foundation of Emunah. Like, you got to know where we come from. Hashem created Bereishis Bar Elokim. Hashem created the world. The people who believe, this of course was the prevalent idea at the time of the Ramban, and certainly stretching all the way back to ancient Greece, the idea that the world has always been in existence. That's the concept of ha'olam kadmon. The idea that the world has always been the universe has always been in existence, right? Is a kofer be'ikah. He's denying fundamentals of our faith. Ve'ein lo Torah klal. He has no Torah. So how can Rashi say, quoting Rabbi Yitzchak? Some say Rabbi Yitzchak is Rashi's father. You heard this idea before? Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki. So some say, beautiful idea, that Rashi begins his Pirush quoting an idea from his father. There's some suggestion that's his Rabbi Yitzchak, right? So the idea is, so this is a very simple question. We need it for Emunah, we need it for everything. How can Rashi say the only reason is to make sure that people understand, that the rest of nations understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu owns the world, and therefore he chooses to give the land of Israel to us? But Shuvah, he says the answer is, he says, you want to try and understand Ma'aseh Bereishis, you're going to fail. It is deep. It is very deep. It's too deep to understand the details. It can only be understood on the basis of Kabbalah, and whether he means a Kabbalah, received tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu, linked together from HaKadosh Baruch himself. These are part of the Sisrei Torah, the secrets of the Torah. And those who know them, you have to hide it. Okay? He says, and that's what Rabbi Yitzchak says, that there isn't, that in terms of beginning of the Torah, there wouldn't be a need to begin with these words, Bereishis bara. The whole details, all the details that we see in that first parak of the Torah, what was created on the first day, what was created on the second day, all that transpired to Adam and Chava and their sin and punishment, etc. Gan Eden, Sipur Gan Eden, the Gurush Adam Mimenu, right? The expulsion from Gan Eden. This cannot properly be understood from the Pesukim alone. The Ramban is doing something very, very important here. You're starting to learn the Torah. You need to understand that. You need to approach it with the right mindset. And it's not only Parashas Bereishis. Often you say this to people who come with these deep questions. I don't understand. The first thing you need is humility, is our novel. The Ramban says, approach it with humility. Understand that you can't understand. There's so many things you cannot understand. And especially Parashas Bereishis, which is like a closed book in so many ways. And he says, V'kol shekein sipur dar hamabul v'haflaga. We think we understand the story of the mabul, or the haflaga, the dispersion. We think we understand it, or we don't. And he says those ideas, even if they are more, understandable than Bereishis, but we don't have great necessity for them. Ostensibly, people who learn the Torah could have managed without that. It's a fascinating approach. He says, we don't need necessarily. You would say, why do we need that in the Torah? All we need to say is, Hashem created the world for 6 days. You're going to get individual special people who are going to have that deep knowledge, right, of the secrets of the Torah, right, and everyone else should be okay just with basically just with via chulu. Hashem created the world 6 days, 7th day rested. Therefore, you keep Shabbos. Statement of Emun. Why do you have to have all the details? Says the Ramban, that's what Rabbi Yitzchak is coming to give a reason for. The Torah begins with Bereishis Bara Elokim, v'sipro kol inyan hayetzira ad brias Adam, and tells the whole story of creation up to the creation of man. V'shem shilo b'maisi yoda v'chol sheis tachas raglov, and Hashem put mankind in control of all of this and put everything under his jurisdiction. The Gan Eden and Gan Eden Shumivchar Makomis, Gan Eden, which is the most cherished of places, which is the most cherished of place in this world. Fascinating idea. You realize that Gan Eden is a place in this world. So the Ramban is understanding, right? And that's what you see, how that's reconciled with the whole idea of Gan Eden and what it also represents. Okay, that's another story. But either way, it's described in the Torah as a place in this world. He was expelled from there through his sin. The people of the flood, they were dispersed, they were driven out from the whole world. And that only Noach was saved. And the sin that occurred to their to his descendants, to spread them out. In other words, the dispersion, the Dor HaFloga, with the Tower of Bovel, the Tovsim and Makomis, etc. Okay, he doesn't talk about how that works. The areas they settled in, and therefore he says, Im came. Now that you've understood, when you learn and understand, and this is why he says you need the whole of Parashas Bereishis. Im came Roihu Kasha Yosef Hagoy Lachtoi. When a nation continues to sin, Shia Abeid Mim Koimoi, that it will be lost from its place, and another nation will come to inherit its land. Because this is the way Hashem runs the world. So the Ramban is telling us like this. Of course, we need Bereishis for basic emunah. But for that, you just need Vayachulu, Hashemayim va'aretz. Hashem created the world, 6 days, 7th day rested. That's it. That's all you need. The story and the whole detail isn't there, says the Ramban, because through that we will understand how the world was created. Because to do that, you need to be on an incredibly high level. The Gemara says, "My Bereishis, can only be it's incredibly deep and too difficult to understand." But what you will understand is the way and the method, if you like, that Hashem runs the world. That's what you'll understand. You'll understand that the essence of what Hashem put into creation itself, right? The idea of the creation and how mankind was given choice, mankind was given responsibility, and mankind messed that up, and therefore Adam and Chava are driven out of Gan Eden, and they mess it up again when it comes to the Mabul. You understand, right? And all of that teaches, ingrains within you an understanding that Hashem runs the world and that mankind has control, but also therefore responsibility. And that's how the Ramban is understanding. So according to Ramban, I mentioned as well, the whole of the essence of Bereishis and the essence of Rabbi Yitzchak, who Rashi quotes, is coming to tell us, you need this to understand this, Rashi, right? Is that it's all around free choice and responsibility. And you can't get that understanding unless the Torah would give it to us through this detailed description of all the events that transpire in Bereishis. You understand? And that brings you to that understanding, which then leads you to an understanding of, as Rabbi Yitzchak says, that if people come along and say, why on earth is it that Hashem has given you this land? Why, who says maybe it was theirs? What do you mean? You've learned Bereishis. You understand how Hashem runs the world. And you understand that there are nations who can get something for a certain amount of time, and then it's gone, and then it's not. Hashem decides otherwise. And he says, if you just, and we're not doing all of it, you skip the next 2 paragraphs, just a very short paragraph at the end. He says that Chazal say this idea, the hidden aspect of Ma'aser Bereishis. He says that and they refer you to the introduction to the Rambam's Moreh Nevuchim on this point. Koach Ma'asav Higid La'amoi, the strength of his creations, his works, he told his people, Lahagid Koach Ma'asav Bereishis L'Bosav Adom I Efsha. It's impossible for flesh and blood to understand, to be told in detail the work of creation. And that's why it doesn't say more than in the beginning, Bora Elokim. And how he understands these three words, Bereishis, Bora Elokim, is of course the huge subject for discussion. And that's the next Ramban I want to show you, which is the next Ramban again. We won't see all of it, just a few ideas. Rashi says, Bereishis Bora Elokim, that it's in the beginning. If you says Rashi says, you can, if you're following inside, it's not, skip the next two paragraphs of this. Not you got Bereishis Bora Elokim because of Rashi, and then the next bit, it's the next one. It says Bereishis again. Can you see that two paragraphs later? And he says, Rashi says, if you're going to explain it like the simple pshat, this is how you should explain it. Bereishis brias shamayim va'aretz, in the beginning of the creation of the heavens and the earth, right? And the world was desolate and dark. And Hashem said, there should be light. And he then brings the Ibn Ezra, who the Ramban refers to as the Rebbe Avram, which is the Ibn Ezra. And he says that the Ibn Ezra understands it in a similar way. It's just that he understands the word v'ha'aretz slightly differently. But essentially, he understands v'ha'aretz is a new. Rashi understands it's all one sentence. In the beginning of Hashem's creation, and the land was, so what's created on day one, according to Rashi? Light. Right? Right. Everything goes after that. That's what you're building up to that word, right? Light. Yes, that's what Hashem created. Ibn Ezra is the same thing. It's just that he understands v'ha'aretz as a new sentence, even though there is a vov. That Ibn Ezra understands that sometimes you can have a vov and it doesn't. It's not a what's the word? Conjunctive, whatever, connective, whatever. Yeah, right. Yeah, it doesn't have to, and therefore it can be a new sentence. Okay. And he also says, according to Ibn Ezra, what was created on day one is the light. The problem is, and the difficulty that Rashi has with this explanation, that if it's coming to tell us, as Rashi spells out, the order of creation, right? The order, then it should have said Borishona in the beginning, right? In the beginning, right? Reishis has to be some, has to be right in the beginning, like the beginning of something. And that's where it all comes from. This problem of how to translate the first word. That's where you get to the idea of understanding it. Bereishis, in the beginning of Hashem's creating, and light. You get that's it, right? Otherwise, it's Borishona in the beginning Hashem created. Now, look at what the Ramban says. Now, the Ramban, however, himself has a different pshat. He says va'ata, and now third paragraph, right where it says va'ata. You see it? Yeah. Va'ata shma pirush hamikra al pshuto nachon abar. He says, I'll explain to you the explanation of the pasuk, the simple pshat, clearly and correctly. HaKadosh Baruch Hu bara kol hanivroim me'afisa muchletes. Hashem created everything, the entire creation, from the ultimate nothingness. That means there was nothing there. Efes, there was absolute nothingness. He lays down a very famous and a critical point. In Lashon HaKodesh, he says, the creation of something from nothing is the only word that can be used to convey that is the word bara, creation. Right? That creation bara means, that word bara means something from nothing, absolutely nothing. There is nothing that is created underneath, in other words, under the sun, in other words, in this world, or above the sun, in other words, in the heavens above, that comes from nothing, complete nothing, right? In other words, right, that there is nothing that comes, that the beginning of it is from absolute nothingness. It comes from something else. It doesn't come from absolute zero, right? So what does come from nothing? What is appearing on this very first moment, split second of creation? He says what appears This absolute nothingness, what appears is Yesod Dak Ma'od. It's something very thin, a very tiny kernel, what we would use perhaps in modern day speech, an atom, something, a beginning. Ein boy mamash, right? That has no substance really to it at all. Avlu koyach mamsi, but it has the capability of producing something else. Mukhan lakabel tzura, that can receive and develop and build into something else. And go from the potential to the actual. He says this is the ultimate beginning. This is the very first entity that exists at the beginning. Nikoli Evonim Hayuli. This is what the Greeks call the Yuli, right? And after that creation of that very first tiny beginning spark, atom, whatever you want to call it, this substance, nothing else was created. It was formed and made, but not created, because it wasn't coming from nothing. Only the very beginning comes from nothing.
Strange that we use the Lashon Berei Bria,
yeah, fascinating, right.
It's not true.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, it is in a sense, because it's all leading back to that moment. He says, Kimimenu himtzi hakol. Everything comes from that. Right? Okay. So everything comes from, it was all created from that very first point. Now, he goes on to explain this in more detail, how exactly it works. And obviously, these are very deep ideas, right? But the key point that Ramban is getting across here is that this creation, right? This is what it means. It's a bit later on. He explains it. And because he goes on to say, there's one substance for the Shomayim, there's one substance for the Oretz, for the land. They're both created from nothing, and they're both created in a distinct way. Basically, how he's understanding it is that Hashem created from nothing, the Bara, the Bria, the beginning, the Shomayim, right, and the Oretz. Okay, and this first substance is what is created at the beginning. And that's what it means. Bereishis bara Elokim, es hashamayim yes haaretz. It's the beginning substances from which everything else stems. It's a very fascinating idea. In lots of ways, you could take that in terms of the development of the universe and go from an initial starting tiny point. We can. It's a very, very fascinating idea. There is a link here to, if you go now to the end of my Sefer Bereishis, so the end you got by Echulu, Perek base. Posuk Gimel. Perek base Posuk Gimel. Right. Yeah. So he said, Kivo Shovas Mikol Malachtoi Asher Bora Elokim La'asos. Now look at the Ramban there on those words Asher Bora Elokim La'asos that Hashem created to make. He says the second paragraph, because he brings Rashi. Rashi says that this idea of this, everything was made on the sixth, on Shabbos was doubled on the sixth day. Ramban has a different approach. He says, "V'linir pirusho sheshavas mekol malachtoi ashebora yesh me'ayin la'asos meno kol ha'ma'asim neskram m'shish zayomim." He was shavas. He rested from all his work, which he created something from nothing, to make all of those creations which were mentioned in Sheish Zayomim. In other words, there was a resting on Shabbos from both Mibria umimaisa, from the creation that he created on day one. That's the Bria, right? Asher Bora Elokim la'asos, and the actions, the Asiya, which he explains is everything else on all the other days, right? Which stemmed from that very first Bria at the beginning. Okay, and that's what it means. Okay, and that's what the Ramban understands. So that's where he links his explanation at the beginning, right at the end. Asher Bora Elokim, these two things, Bora and Lasis. There's obviously a lot more here. We're really completely scratching the surface, because of course the question of the concept of Bora is also used in other times in the Sefer Bereishis, particularly with Odom, right? How Bria occurs with mankind, etc. So it's used in other places as well. We have very limited time. Let's just share with you briefly. Something else I wanted to say. Okay. Let me just find. Okay, let's just do something totally from the end of the parsha, because as I said, just as a final idea. Yeah, you go right to the very end. Perek Vov, Posuk Gimel. Vayoma Hashem lo yodon ruchi va'odom la'olam b'shegam hu v'asar. But Hashem says this is the end, right? So in other words, we'll begin with the beginning, and this really links to that Ramban that we saw at the beginning. The idea, as we said, that the whole of the essence of creation and the detail the Torah gives in the whole description of what transpired at the beginning is to help us understand the concepts of responsibility and free choice and bechira, and that man is, that we have consequences for our actions and everything else. What happens at the end? The ultimate example of this with the Dora Mabul, that they lose everything because of what they've done, right? He brings Rashi's explanation of what it means, b'shegam hu basar. That Rashi understands that there's also this factor in him that he's flesh and blood, and yet mankind doesn't behave as if they're subdued in front of me, says Hashem, and therefore I'm not going to cope with, they're going to put up with them anymore, effectively, right? He doesn't like that pshat. He says, he finds it very difficult. It's only brief. What's correct in my eyes says that my spirit will not contend with man forever. But because of the fact that mankind is flesh, because he's like any other flesh creature that crawls on the ground. That's what he's become. That's what the Ramban understands it. But shegamu basar ve'inenu roilios ruach elikim b'kirbo vayipach ba'afom nishmas chaim. I gave you everything. I gave you the potential to rise above all of this. But shegamu basar, but you're behaving like basar. You're behaving like a slab of meat. The idea is, says the Ramban, Hashem made mankind yashar. He made us straight. You can be like the malachim. You've got a nefesh, you've got a chelek elokayim emal, you've got memal, you've got this incredible potential to be like the malachim. But he went after the bossa, after Tivus Agufonius and Tivus of flesh and blood. Nimshach of became like animals. And that's what it means. The Ruach Elokim, Ruchi, is no longer, right, within him. He's just flesh and not godly. But Hashem will give them time if they do tshuva. Okay? And this is how he brings the pasuk in Tinah. They're just basar, and they're temporal. They're just temporal. There's nothing existential. There's nothing metaphysical and spiritual. And therefore, what the Ramban is doing here is he's explaining that fundamentally. And again, I think this links beautifully with that first one that we saw. That the message of what the Torah is saying, is saying that mankind has a choice. They can be basar, or can have ruach elokim. And what the Dora Mabul did is they demonstrated that they were nothing more than a behemoth. And when mankind is nothing more than a behemoth and doesn't act and rise above it and have those ultimate spirituality and aims and ability and desire to reach higher, there's nothing left. And then they are genuinely like basar, like a behemoth. And therefore, it is all dependent, as we said, on exercising the koach of bechira. It's all this exercising the power of free will. And that's a theme which he develops. So we're only scratching the surface, but what I hope from, taking this approach, it's nice to do something different, but more than that, it's just, we can hopefully try and develop ideas, through the parshas, how the Ramban learns the parsha, and take through that Divrei Torah, and we can kind of develop something which we can, it's almost like themes, as we've seen today, themes that accompany us through the Torah, particularly these parshas. So thank you all. Thank you for coming. Hashem, we'll continue. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks for joining. Okay, have a very good Shabbos. Service.